I wanted to talk not about my work at all today, but I'm not wearing my usual cap, which is poet, but this time sort of anthologist. I did this book for the British market. I wanted to show them some of the earliest poetry written by people writing in English in Australia. I mean, I made the point in the introduction that Australia had poetry for about 60,000 years before the white people arrived, but that's another matter. This is concerning itself mainly with the language that I know best. And I wanted to look at what I thought were the best four early Australian poets. And there are probably people in this room who know a lot more about that than I do. But my choices were Frank the Poet McNamara, who was a convict, and then people born in the 19th century who lived into the 20th. They were Dame Mary Gilmore. She wasn't Dame all her life, but she was Mary Gilmore. And she's on your $10 note if you want to see what she looked like when young. And Lesbia Haafadu, I think is a wonderful poet, much under noticed until about the 1980s. And John Shaw Neilson, whom I sometimes find a little bit too sweet for my taste, but he is a marvellous poet at his best, I think. I probably can't talk about all of these today. What I did was compile a book of what I thought were their best poems and a biographical note about each one. I don't do much criticism at all anymore. I've been on the wrong end of criticism a bit too many times. And so I mostly talk about their lives and sometimes tell stories about them. And I did an earlier book called Five Fathers, which is about five male poets from Australia of the classic period just before my own, which was the period of David Campbell and James Macaulay and Ken Slessor and Roland Robinson and Frank Webb. That book has been selling steadily in Britain now for about 18 years. It only ever got 1.5 reviews in Britain, but it's sold quite nicely. This one's been out since, what year was it? 2005. And the cover picture is rather lovely if you get a chance to look at it. It's a whole alphabet cut out of wood, kauri wood, by a New Zealand sculptor. And it's called Language as Virus. And the letters of the Western alphabet are floating towards a new country, towards a new land. I think it's a lovely metaphor. That's by Virginia, what was her surname? Dang it, I should remember. It's in here someplace. I'll tell you before we finish, I think. And so Frank the Poet McNamara claimed that he was born in Cashel in County Tipperary. Record said that he was born in Wicklow. Came to Australia in the 1830s for stealing a plaid, but probably much more likely he came because he was a member of the ribbonmen, people who were agitated against paying tithes to the English church in Ireland when they weren't themselves Anglicans, although he often called himself an Anglican. The convicts often put down as much wrong information about themselves as possible in the official records so as to confuse them. And he's found in has various names, religions, and origins and so on in various records. It makes him a bit hard to trace. The tracing was largely done by one John Meredith, who was an old Australian folklorist, a very good one, and of the period of the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And he and another chap published a book called Rex Whalen, published a book called Frank the Poet, which was, as far as they could possibly do, it was a biography of Frank with a complete collection of his poems. When I read the poems, I thought there are a few here I think have been written down by Francis McNamara, but probably weren't composed by him because they sound utterly different from the rest of the poems. But I'll give you a chance to judge that yourself by reading you a few bits. The first one's a song most people know. It's called, mostly it's called Morton Bay, but the full title of it, or the full version of it I've got here, is called The Convict's Arrival. I'll read you two stanzas of it. Early one morning, as I carelessly wandered by the Brisbane waters, I chanced to stray. I saw a prisoner sadly bewailing while on the sunbeaming banks he lay. He said, I have been a prisoner in Port Macquarie, at Norfolk Island and Emu Plains, at Castle Hill and Kirstoon Gabby, and all those places I worked in chains. But of all the places of condemnation in each penal station of New South Wales, Morton Bay I found no equal, for excessive tyranny each day prevails. Early in the morning, as the day is dawning, to trace from heaven the morning dew, up we are started at a moment's warning, our daily labour for to renew. Our overseers and superintendents, all those cursed tyrants' language we must obey, or else at the triangles our flesh is mangled. That is our wages at Morton Bay. For 3 long years I've been beastly treated, heavy irons each day I wore. My poor back from flogging has been lacerated, and oft times painted with crimson gore. And it's a good song, and it's got a great tune called Boule Vogue, but it always sounds to me like a fairly standard product. You know, it's the kind of song that used to be hawked around the streets for a penny, you know, what they call a broadside ballad. And it doesn't sound much like this poem, which is called For the Company Underground. Frank was up at on the Peel River, where Tamworth was going to stand, as a shepherd, and sleeping in a box at night to keep the dingoes from eating him while he kept the dingoes from eating the sheep. And he liked that up there because he didn't get flogged as much. You know, apparently the trouble with Frank was that he was a very intelligent man with a sort of it seems a fairly non-academic education. He was sort of probably got most of his learning standing up with a pint in his hand, but or a shovel in his hand. But he was well versed in Irish and English language poetry, and he had a ready tongue and a ready wit, and he liked to make up little squibs. And occasionally one of the convict authorities would say something that had caused him to reply in verse and get himself flogged. He's known to have been flogged for at least 14 times. And he was finally sent to Van Diemen's Land. But that story I can tell you a bit in a moment. And anyhow, up there on the Peel River, he was told that he had to move down to Newcastle to work underground for the Australian Agricultural Company, which owned coal mines down there. And it was horrendous work. I mean, the mines were filthy. The air would kill you dead in five years from breathing it. And they worked naked in the drives down below because it was so hot. And he wasn't very, very willing to do it. For the Company Underground, Francis McNamara of Newcastle to J. Crosdale, Esquire. Greeting. Crosdale was the superintendent of the AA Company's colliery. When Christ from heaven comes down straightway, all his father's laws to expound, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When the man in the moon to Morton Bay is sent in shackles bound, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When the Cape of Good Hope to Twofold Bay comes for the change of a pound, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When cows in lieu of milk yield tea and all lost treasures are found, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When the Australian Company's heaviest dray is drawn 80 miles by a hound, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When a frog, a caterpillar and a flea shall travel the globe all round, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When turkey cocks on dews harps play and mountains dance at the sound, McNamara shall work that day for the Company Underground. When milestones go to church to pray and whales are put in the pound, McNamara shall work that day for the company underground. When Christmas falls on the 1st of May and O'Connell's King of England crowned, McNamara shall work that day for the company underground. When thieves ever robbing on the highway for their sanctity are renowned, McNamara shall work that day for the company underground. When the quick and the dead shall stand in array, sighted at the trumpet's sound, even then, damn me if I'd work a day for the company underground, nor overground. There's a good deal more spirit in that, I think, and a lot more vocabulary, and it doesn't sound like the standard article at all. And I think that's the other one might be dubious, but I think that is a recognisable human being. The same bloke has composed this. Now, I pointed out the reason the book is called Hell and After is that the first city ever described in Australian English language literature is not Sydney or Melbourne, it's Hell. And Frank went for a trip down there in this poem called The Convict's Tour to Hell. It's longish, but I think you'll enjoy it. Composed at Stroud AA Company Establishment Station, New South Wales, October 23rd day, anno 1839. You prisoners of New South Wales who frequent watch houses and jails, a story to you I will tell, 'tis of a convict's tour to hell, whose valour had for years been tried on the highway before he died. At length he fell to death a prey, to him it proved a happy day. Downwards he bent his course, I'm told, like one destined for Satan's fold, and no refreshment would he take till he approached the Stygian lake. A tent he then began to fix, contiguous to the river Styx. Thinking that no one could molest him, he leapt when Charon thus addressed him, Stranger, I say, from whence art thou? On thy own name, pray, tell me now. Kind sir, I come from Sydney jail. My name I don't mean to conceal, and since you seem anxious to know it, on earth I was called Frank the Poet. Are you that person? Charon cried. I'll carry you to the other side. 5 or 6pence I mostly charge for the like passage in my barge. So, stranger, do not trouble be, for you shall have a passage free. Frank, seeing no other succour nigh, with the invitation did comply. And having a fair wind and tide, they soon arrived at the other side. And leaving Charon at the ferry, Frank went in haste to Purgatory. And rapping loudly at the gate of Limbo, or the Middle State, Pope Pius VII soon appeared, with gown, beads, crucifix and beard. And gazing at the poet the while, accosts him in the following style. Stranger, art thou a friend or foe? Your business here I fain would know. Quoth the poet, for heaven I'm not fitted, and here I hope to be admitted. Pius rejoined, vain are your hopes, this place was made for priests and popes. 'Tis a world of our own invention. But friend, I've not the least intention to admit such a foolish elf who scarcely knows how to bless himself. Quote Frank, were you mad or insane when first you made this world of pain? For I can see naught but fire, a share of which I can't desire. Here I see weeping, wailing, gnashing, the torments of the newest fashion. Therefore I call you a silly elf who made a rod to whip yourself. And may you, like all honest neighbours, enjoy the fruit of all your labours. Frank then bid the Pope farewell and hurried to that place called Hell. And having found the gloomy gate, Frank rapped aloud to know his fate. He louder knocked and louder still. When the devil came, pray, what's your will? Alas, cried the poet, I've come to dwell with you and share your fate in hell. Says Satan, that can't be, I'm sure, for I detest and hate the poor. And none shall in my kingdom stand except the grandees of the land. But Frank, I think you're going astray, for convicts never come this way, but soar to heaven in droves and legions, a place so called in the upper regions. So Frank, I think with an empty purse you shall go further and fare worse. Well, cried the poet, since 'tis so, one thing of you I'd like to know, as I'm at present in no hurry. Have you one here called Captain Murray? Yes, Murray is within this place. Would you, said Satan, see his face? May God forbid that I should view him, for on board the Phoenix hulk I knew him. Who is that, sir, in yonder blaze, who on fire and brimstone seems to graze? 'Tis Captain Logan of Morton Bay, and Williams was killed the other day. He was overseer at Gross Farm and done poor convicts no little harm. Cook, who discovered New South Wales, and he that first invented jails, are both tied to a fiery stake which stands in yonder boiling lake. Hark, do you hear this dreadful yelling? It issues from Dr. Wardell's dwelling, and all those fiery seats and chairs are fitted up for dukes and mayors and nobles and judicial orders, barristers, lawyers and recorders. Here I beheld legions of traitors, hangmen, jailers and flagellators, commandants, constables and spies, informers and overseers likewise. In flames of brimstone they were toiling, and lakes of sulphur round them boiling. Hell did resound with their fierce yelling. Alas, how dismal was their dwelling! Then Major Morisset I spied, and Captain Clooney by his side. With a fiery belt they were lashed together as tight as soles to upper leather. Their situation was most horrid, for they were tyrants down at the Norrid. Prostrate I beheld a petitioner, it was the company's commissioner. Satan, says he, my days are ended. For many years I've superintended the Australian Company's affairs, and I punctually paid all arrears. Sir, should you doubt the hopping colonel, at Carrington you'll find my journal, legibly penned in black and white, to prove that my accounts were right. And since I've done your will on earth, I hope you'll put me in a berth. Then I saw old Sergeant Flood, in Vulcan's hottest forge he stood. He gazed at me, his eyes with ire appeared like burning coals of fire. In fiery garments he was arrayed, and like an Arabian horse he brayed. He on a bloody cutlass leaned, and to a lamppost was chained. He loudly called out for assistance, or begged me to end his existence. Cheer up, I said, be not afraid. Remember number 3 stockade. In the course of time you may do well if you behave yourself in hell. Your heart on earth was fraught with malice, which oft drove convicts to the gallows. But now you'll atone for all the blood of prisoners shed by Sergeant Flood. Then I beheld that well-known trapman, the police runner called Izzy Chapman. Here he was standing on his head in a river of melted boiling lead. Alas, he cried, behold me, stranger. I've captured many a bold bushranger, and for the same I'm suffering here. But lo, now yonder snakes draw near. On turning round I saw slow worms and snakes of various kinds and forms, all entering at his mouth and nose to devour his entrails, as I suppose. Then turning round to go away, bold Lucifer bade me to stay, saying, Frank, by no means go, man, till you see your old friend Dr. Bowman. Yonder he tumbles, groans and gnashes, he gave you many 1,000 lashes. And for the same he does bewail, for Oscar with an iron flail thrashes him well, you may depend, and will till the world comes to an end. Just as I spoke, a coach and 4 came in full post-haste to the door, and about 6 feet of mortal sin, without leave or licence, trudged in. At his arrival 3 cheers were given, which rent, I'm sure, the highest heaven. And all the inhabitants of hell with one consent rang the great bell, which never was heard to sound or ring since Judas sold our heavenly King. Drums were beating, flags were hoisting. There never before was such rejoicing, dancing, singing, joy or mirth, in heaven above or on the earth. Straightway to Lucifer I went to know what all these rejoicings meant. Of sense, cried Lucifer, I'm deprived, since Governor Darling has arrived. With fire and brimstone I've ordained him, and Vulcan has already chained him. And I'm going to fix an abode for Captain Rossi, he's on the road. Frank, don't go till you see the novice, the magistrate from the police office. Oh, said the poet, I'm satisfied to hear that he is to be tied and burned in this world of fire. I think 'tis high time to retire. And having travelled many days o'er the fiery hills and broiling seas, at length I found the happy place, where all the woes of mortals cease. And rapping loudly at the wicket, cried Peter, where's your certificate? Or if you have not one to show, pray who in heaven do you know? Well, I know brave Donahue, young Troy and Jenkins too, and many others whom floggers mangled, and lastly were by Jack Ketch strangled. Peter, says Jesus, let Frank in, for he is thoroughly purged from sin. And although in convict's habit dressed, here he shall be a welcome guest. Isaiah, go with him to Job, and put on him a scarlet robe. St. Paul, go to the flock straightway and kill the fatted calf today. And go tell Abraham and Abel, in haste now to prepare the table, for we shall have a grand repast since Frank the poet has come at last. Then came Moses and Elias, John the Baptist and Matthias, with many saints from foreign lands. And with the poet they all joined hands. Through heaven's concave their rejoicings rang, and hymns of praise to God they sang. And as they praised his glorious name, I woke and found 'twas but a dream. I think that's the first important poem in English in Australia. It hasn't, as I say, been noticed much in the past. And I used to be shown people like Henry Kendall and so on, and they're fair enough in their way, but I never found one that was as much fun as that so far back. Let me see, what have I missed telling you about Frank the poet? That year 1839 seems to have been fairly crucial in his life, because instead of going to work in the coal mines in Newcastle, he and a whole lot of other fellas fled and were recaptured in the mountains, and some of them had got guns from somewhere, so that technically they could all have been hung. Escapees carrying guns were subject to a death sentence, but they were let off by the judge and merely resentenced to, further punishment. And that was the point where Frank was sent to Van Diemen's Land. And something seems to have happened to him down there, because he wrote very little more. One or two things are attributed to him, but only a few quatrains seem to survive that you can say unquestionably are Frank the poet. And late in the 19th century, somebody, I think it might have been Banjo Patterson, was looking around amongst old convict records and found a book owned by the family called Calf up the New England country somewhere. And somebody had written in that, in a good sort of early 19th century hand, a number of poems, and signed himself Frank the poet. And it's thought that was probably really Frank. But whether all of those compositions were by him or not, nobody can tell now. So I sort of go by nose. I figure the fellow who sounds jaunty and inventive and strangely unmalicious, even though he's had a bad time, I think that's Frank. I'm not so sure about the other ballads. But, you never know.